camera like that. But welcome to the Black Podcast. It's Thursday, and I'm excited every Thursday, of course, because we have some guests on here. My partner's over here. He's falling asleep already. We just started. But we want to thank you for being a guest or being in the audience of the Black Podcast. We have been on here for a little over a year, maybe a lot over the year now. We've been almost closer to a year and a half, and it's just been great, right? The type of people that we have brought in front of our audience, the type of knowledge and stories that we have heard over the past year and a half. If you haven't grown from looking at our podcast, you need to go back and start look at some of them other videos of people that have shared their stories, from professional athletes to politicians to mothers to fathers to doctors, superintendents, just all over the place. So the guest that we have on today, she's amazing. I can just tell you that right now. She's gonna just take the stage, and we're gonna sit back and let her do her thing. But we want to thank you for always tuning in on Thursday. For those who continue to share the video and the content, thank you so much. You're doing your part on helping our community grow, right? If we don't share people's stories and we don't influence the people or inspire the people that are in our circle, then what are we doing, right? So please make sure that even though you may feel like this story doesn't relate to you, or you don't understand the story, or you're not interested in the story, you never know who's in your circle that may need to hear this story. So please make sure that you're doing your part in sharing this video, whether you're listening to it live or on a replay. Please make sure that you do your part and share. I am one of your co-hosts, Dr. Cheryl Hobson, and you already know I have a background in education and athletics, and we together decided to create a company called HSBA, where we help to change the narrative of our young Black males within education through HBCUs, our public ed, as well as high school. So please make sure that as you're looking at the Black Podcast, know that there's a even bigger story behind the Black Podcast and why we're doing the things that we're doing. So please make sure you also support us at wearehsbs.com, and you'll find out more about what we're doing within the community. But as far as the Black Podcast, we like to share stories, real live stories. We have people on here that have been totally vulnerable, and if you haven't grown from that, then you're not listening. So you need to go ahead and rewind back and listen to it again, because I can tell you, Brian, I listen to these I it's our show, and I'm always looking back at some of the guests that we have. But then the guests that we have coming forward, we look forward to them, right? Because their stories are unique and different. So thank you again for being a part of the Black Podcast family.
Yeah, it's just it's remarkable, not only the wisdom that you can take in, but also that what you can take in and then redistribute throughout the community by being on platforms like this. So I'm just super excited to hear about our guests today. As most of you know, I have a background in psychology, merged that into the social work space, got into the entrepreneurship space, and started to merge those together to where now I operate as a social entrepreneur, whereas I help develop businesses and partner with various different companies to generate revenue to go towards the development and sustainability of mentorship related programs for specifically our underserved population, in the Black community. And I met Cheryl back in 2018. Throughout that year and the following year, we stayed in touch here and there, but it was the beginning of 2020 that she let me know she finally finished her doctorate. And initially, I knew she mentioned what she was doing, but we kind of compared notes and goals, so to say, and it was like we're almost mirror images of what we wanted to do with our, our careers moving forward. And as she mentioned, we came together, and we have the Black Podcast, we have HSBA, we have various offshoots of our company that really just reach out and pour into that next generation. But y'all hear about us enough. I am ready to hear from this guest today. She has been able to share the stage to partner up with some of the most well known names when it comes to self help, when it comes to personal development, when it comes to really seeing what it is you want out of life and taking the steps necessary to get there. I'm going to let her share the beautifulness of her story with us. So, guys, I'm about to take notes. So, y'all make sure you get ready to take notes as well, because it's going to be some valuable information. And without further ado, we welcome to you Dr. Cheryl Wood. How's it going?
Fantastic. Look, I'm just loving y'all energy. I'm loving everything that you guys stand for and represent and how you're just blessing the community with your gifts and your talents. So, I mean, I don't think I could find a better place to spend this next hour with than right here on the Black Podcast. So, thank you for having me.
Well,
You're
you are so
welcome.
sweet.
I know, right?
And we vibing with the red lipstick. See, Brian, you're not ready for it. Two divas in here.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'm gonna
I
let y'all
don't,
do y'all
I
thing.
don't know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I'm
that's
just saying.
Cheryl and Sherelle. Right? Cheryl and Sherelle,
Exactly.
you know?
I'm
I
just
just stay in
saying.
my lane.
It's
Stay
meant
in
to
my
be.
lane.
It's meant to be. And thank you, Dr. Wood, for being a guest, of course. And I have stalked you and watched you and passed you on to my partner and everything else. So we were excited when you said yes. I said, "Well, hello, we must be in there like swimwear in a Black podcast." But we thank you again. Um, we like to start our stories off with we know that within the Black community, a lot of our young men and women, or even adults, right, we see these images of people, and we think, wow, her life is so perfect, right? Everything looks like it just fell into place. And so we know that behind every glory is a story. And so we want to know just a little background, starting from the very beginning of where you're from and the dynamics of your family.
Yeah, I love that you say that because it's so true. And social media makes it seem like everything is just so picture perfect. But that's because people give you a snapshot and it's always going to be the best snapshot. It's not going to be the worst snapshot, right? So for me, I love sharing the story because I believe my story is a story of hope and possibility, in knowing that no matter where you start, you can grow into who you want to become. My background, I grew up in an inner city housing project in Baltimore, Maryland called Lafayette Projects. It was everything that you would expect to find in a project environment: crime, violence, drug addiction. I mean, I remember vividly coming out of my 13-story high rise apartment building every morning and seeing on every corner guys with their pants hanging down. And you knew those were the drug guys who were selling the drugs. But then you would look across and you would see people who were like just kind of passed out on the sidewalk, strung out from those drugs. Like I witnessed that every day. I witnessed seeing young girls who were 12, 13, and 14 who were already pregnant, bearing children at that young age. I saw people who worked every day, right? You bump into the same people coming and going, and you see them going to work and you see them running for the bus, and you know they're working hard to try to get out of poverty, but yet are still so beneath the poverty line because they're making so little money that it's just like they just can't escape it. That was my mother as well. My mother was a single mom raising myself and my brother and sister, and worked every day for 25 years. She worked for Baltimore City Public Schools as the manager of school cafeterias. She had such a strong work ethic. She never took a day off. Even if she didn't feel good, she pushed herself to go to work. And we were still so beneath the poverty line that we lived in those horrible conditions. I remember there were times when my mother could barely put food on the table, and that was with government assistance. And I used to hate that. I used to hate watching this woman work so hard and knowing we still had to be on food stamps. And then I would be in line with my mom when she would grocery shop, and I would be embarrassed because I would pray that nobody at school saw me in line with my mama paying with food stamps. So it wasn't a pretty environment growing up. It certainly wasn't an environment where anyone is telling you that you can be a giant in the world. Most people are telling you that you're going to be another statistic. Now, to add to that, as if things weren't bad enough externally, even inside my household, it was very dysfunctional. My father, unfortunately, suffered from alcoholism, severe alcoholism, and really kind of wreaked havoc in our lives. I remember there were times where he would get so drunk and then he would just do crazy. He would act crazy and he would do crazy things. And he would bust out the windows in my mother's car or slash her tires or yell and scream and bang on the door until the police got called. And I can't tell you how many times I saw my father ushered away to jail. So it was a very dysfunctional environment growing up. Again, not one where anybody was saying, oh, you get to come from this craziness and this dysfunction and this poverty and be somebody. So thankfully, my mother, even in all of this dysfunction, she was very much, as they call it now, a helicopter mom. Like my mother was so strict, we couldn't go nowhere. We couldn't do nothing. You hear what I'm saying? unless mama was with us. So she was very strict. She demanded respect. She demanded that we do well in school, even in spite of everything that was happening in our household and in our environment. And I believe that was one of the reasons that it allowed me to come out and still be, sane and still have some hope of being able to still soar in life, even in spite of that environment and growing up in that environment.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. So, if we can talk more about when you were actually in that moment, right? You was in that environment. We always tell our students, or we tell people that if we see someone not doing well, if they are doing well, we'll say, "Oh, they're a product of their environment," right? Um, Being that you took a different route, what was it about your situation? I'm just trying to get an understanding. I don't know how if I'm wording this right, but while you were growing up in this situation in your teens, knowing, did you know, like, okay, this is not what I consider to be life? Or did you know, right? Because some people don't know that they're broke. Like, we had a guy on the show, he said he didn't know he was poor until he went to somebody else's house and they had choices. He opened the refrigerator and he was like, I can pick what I want to eat. Like, at my house, I can't. So, he didn't know that he was poor into that. So if you can just kind of explain or talk more about that space, what was your thinking? Did you feel like this was what life was about? Did you know there was something different outside it? And if you did, what was it that exposed you to, okay, there's more to my situation?
Oh, I definitely knew we was poor. There was no question about where I had to go to nobody else's house to know how poor we were. Number one, people who know me now know, do not ever put lima beans in front of me, because that was my mother's go-to. That was the poor food go-to for my mama, was them damn. Let me tell you, it was lima beans, black eyed peas, and salmon cakes. Oh God, it's the worst. It's like, do
I can
not
eat the
tell
salmon
me about
cakes
this
now.
stuff. Man, it was horrible. And I used to hate seeing, because with beans, you got to soak the beans before you go out in the morning. And I would look over and see them on lima beans soaking in water, but like, that's gonna be dinner tonight. Or her favorite, liver and rice. Now, thank God my
Oh
mother,
yeah, my mom makes liver. Whew.
look, it was cheap eats. Thankfully, my mother was a good cook, so she could at least make it a little bit tasty. But don't show me no liver as a grown folk. No, don't show me no liver. So yeah, I knew we were poor. I knew we were broke. Again, I used to be embarrassed at the fact that my mother worked every day. I couldn't connect the dots between, how do you work every day and work so hard, but you still poor? I just didn't get it. I didn't get that concept. And I didn't get the concept of, like, who would want to stay in this, right? So my mother was a master at, I always say, she reveled in financial struggle, meaning there was like a pride that she took in robbing Peter to pay Paul. And honestly, I grew up with that. So when I got older, I was like, oh yes, I kept them lights on. It was like a pride in that. I'm like, I don't want to be proud of, ooh, I took a little bit from over here, a little bit from over here. No, I want abundance. I want prosperity. But I didn't figure that out until later. But what I did know is I did not want to exist the way my mother existed. I did know I didn't want to be listening for the sound of the gas and electric man, and you hear that sound. I don't know if you've ever had your lights turned off, but that haunts me to this day. I knew I didn't want to live that way. I knew I didn't want to have to be on government assistance. I knew I wanted something different than the environment I grew up in. That is not how I wanted my life to look. Now, I didn't know how I was going to get out of that, because nobody in my family, they didn't go to college. I didn't come from a long line of college graduates. I didn't come from a long line of entrepreneurs. Like, I didn't have some perfectly mapped blueprint or roadmap set out for me, like, here's how you get out. But it was the things that my mother instilled in me through the actions that she modeled that became the catalyst for me moving forward. So I do believe if you work hard, I do believe if you're honest and you have integrity, I do believe if you're disciplined, I do believe if you have a strong, solid work ethic, that you can propel yourself to places where other people won't get there, because they're not disciplined. They don't have a solid, strong work ethic. They don't have a commitment to getting something. So for me, those qualities that I saw her modeling became instilled in me. And I didn't at the time necessarily know that they were going to serve me the way that they did, but they did.
Wow. Wow. So I know you said you keep mentioning modeling a lot, that your mother modeled this, you modeled that. Um, just kind of two things, and I'll let Brian go. When you talk about modeling, was there ever any conversations on, we always have our parents tell us, we want you to have more, I want you to be better than I was, or some families didn't have those conversations at all. So if you can speak on, were there any conversations that were going on? And then let's talk about even like love, right? What is love? You saying that, growing up where you saw your father act a particular way, whether or not your mom stayed or didn't stay, what was that thinking process for you? Like, okay, is this love? Okay, this is not love. So I want to know a little bit of both. I want to know, were there conversations on, your life, your life endeavors, and then also, were there any conversations, or any thinking on like what love looked like to you, what it meant to be like in a relationship, what family looked like? Speak on that too as well.
Yeah, I love the questions that you're asking. So the answer is no, no, and no. There were no conversations. There were no conversations. And I love my mom and I respect my mom. I honor my mom. And I think, we do what we can with what we know and what we've grown up with. And so I don't blame her. I don't bash her. She did the best she could with what she knew. But there was no conversation. There was no communication. There was no, let's talk about your credit. Let's talk about how you get out of the hood. There was no conversation about money. There was no conversations about greatness. There was no conversations about growth. There was no conversations about personal development or professional development. Those conversations didn't exist in my world, like at all. Like what we did was we read the Bible. I mean, I just got to be true. That's what we did.
Pray on it and go to sleep.
That's it. We pray, we read the Bible, we get back up, we do the same stuff again the next day. And so those conversations, money conversations didn't take place. How to be better, how to do better, how to soar, how to thrive as an adult, that it just didn't take place. And then on the other side of that, the whole love piece, it's so interesting that you asked that question because I mean, I knew that my mother loved me, right? Even though I hated that she was so strict. But I think when you put certain things in place, kids know that you love them versus when you don't. Like if you love somebody, you try to protect them. Even if they hate it, even if it's overboard, in your subconscious mind, somehow they love you. I think when people are absent and they're not trying to protect you, that's when you question the love. So I knew that my mother loved me. I questioned whether my father loved me because he was a here and there father. He was never really fully present in my life. He would come into the household. My mother would have expectations. All right, you're going to be in the household. You got to get a job. You got to contribute to the household. That wouldn't happen. He would spend more time and more money drinking than anything. That would ensue into an argument. That argument would end up being a fight, a physical altercation. There were times when my mother and father were like in these domestic situations, and it was so bad that my mother would just wait for my father to fall asleep in his drunken stupor. And wee hours of the morning, maybe 2, 3 in the morning, she would whisper and wake us up and like, don't bring anything, just let's go. So we're in our pajamas, leaving the house in the middle of the night to go to a place called the House of Ruth. I remember staying in the House of Ruth more times than I even want to remember, which is a protective place where battered women and their children can come and stay. And we would do that until we hoped my father would leave or something would happen, whatever the thing was. And eventually we would go back to the house. But it was dysfunctional. So I think I questioned whether or not my father loved me because he was like never there. And then when he was, it was dysfunction. So how do you how is that love? Right. And what I learned from my father, which now I have had to address as an adult, is it created in me this feeling of abandonment issues, right? Like nothing good is going to last. It's always going to be over. Like, y'all, I'm telling you, that's real talk. Like I struggled with that in my life. I struggled with that in my business because whenever he would come, it would be good for a minute. but you always knew it was going to get messed up. It wasn't going to last. You knew it. And so I brought that into my life. I brought that into my business. I wouldn't initially develop relationships with people because I'm like, it ain't going to last. We friends now, but we're not going to be friends. By next year, they'll be hating me. Like it was real stuff that was a result of what I experienced from his behavior. So did it mess me up a little bit? Mm-hmm, but that's why they got therapy. I'm just saying.
Yeah, for real, for real. But
Yeah.
you know what? And I'll let Brian go ahead and go. But the reason why I'm asking that is because I believe that love is the root to a lot of things, right? And how you view love, how you receive love, how you give love. A lot of times is that, I guess, that vehicle or that power. Like a life, I feel like it's like a source, right? You always know, like, man, if I'm supported, if I'm loved, you think that you can accomplish certain things when you know how to love. And it's kind of weird how it goes, but like you said, like you having that space of like, I don't know, it made you doubt everything else that you did, right? But if you had something that was more consistent, more, the love was abundant, it was supportive, it was like, oh, I know I can go and do this and that. And so
You,
I
you know what,
say
Mike? You know
that.
what the catalyst was for me? I gotta share this. When I got to a certain age, which was my teenage years, and I'm gonna say maybe around like 15. When I got to about 15, I started getting angry. And that's why I tell people don't always see anger as a negative emotion. Like we automatically, as soon as we hear anger, it's equated to something negative and bad. And I don't believe that. I got angry. I started getting angry. I was old enough to understand what was happening in my environment. I was old enough to see my mother take my father back after his craziness, let him in to be crazy again. Now he get kicked out. Now we going to visit him in jail. Then he get out. Then he come back together again. Then he act crazy again. Then he going back to jail. It was a cycle of chaos that I hated. And once I got to that age of about 15, I started getting angry at my mother, to be very honest, that she would continue to allow that behavior to exist in our lives. And that I feel like what start to be the catalyst of me saying, oh, my life is going to be so different. It was that age range and really looking at my mom as such a strong woman who was doing everything by herself. But yet in this one area of her life, her relationship with my father, it was like she was weak. It was like she couldn't make a decision. It was like she couldn't stand up and say no more. And that used to anger me once I got to about 15. And I felt like that was one of the catalysts of me saying, you know what? Oh, just wait till I get up out of here. Like my life.
I'm gonna show y'all.
I'm gonna show y'all that my life is gonna be so different. I ain't gonna have to never deal with none of this craziness again. So
Amen. Amen.
Now, I like that you went back and elaborated on that, or went deeper into that, because you mentioned your life being different again. It's so often, especially in a motivational speaking space, personal development period, we often hear people say, cast a vision, set a goal, see where you want to be, see what you want your life to be in X number of years. But when you've only been exposed to a certain something, you don't know what that looks like. But what you can do is say, you know what, I don't want this anymore.
yeah.
So whatever the opposite of this looks like, that's what I'm going after. And so many people will say, well, I don't have the network or the connections that you have to get to where you got to. Well, look at the people who are around you and see if you can find some people who are the opposite of them. It's so easy for us, especially in the self-help space, to tell people to think positive, to be optimistic. But sometimes that can feel like, from their perspective, that we're diminishing their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to let them know, no, I see where you're coming from. I feel, I hear where you're coming from. So at the bare minimum, consider the alternative. So sometimes you have to dig deeper into the hurt, dig deeper into, you see, if you don't make a change, that what you're dealing with right there, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, that's going to be magnified. It's going to be even worse. So what can you start doing today that's in the opposite direction of what it is that you're doing today, what it is you're experiencing? So I love the fact that you mentioned my life is going to be different. You didn't say exactly what it was going to be, but it's going to be different. And that's where it starts. And in getting to a different type of life, a certain discipline has to kick in. And I have an assumption as to where some of your discipline may have come from. But if you could kind of elaborate on whenever you did start to cross that threshold and say, you know what, I'm about to go get me. I'm about to go get what's mine. When you did cross that threshold, where did the discipline come from to actually continue towards success? Based off of what you saw, you could have easily been complacent and say, you know what, I'm just going to keep on robbing Peter to pay Paul because I mean, I know how to do it and I'm skilled in this. You could have continued to stay that route. But where did the discipline come to never give up until you got to ultimately where it is that you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think once you get on a path of experiencing a different life, you realize that, okay, this is kind of good, but I think there's even better than this. Like, you always know there's another level. There's levels to everything in life. There's level to poverty, there's level to abundance, there's level to, right, levels of wealth. So I think all of us know at some point within us that there are levels to everything. So once I kind of, basically when I graduated high school from Baltimore, Maryland, I immediately went into the workforce. So I did not go to college. I didn't go, and get to discover who I was. My main focus was I ain't going to be poor. That was it. I'm not going to be poor living in the hood. I was done with that.
POE.
Right. I ain't gonna be broke. I'm not. And so that's my focus was on that. Now remember, I believe I got my drive and a lot of my discipline and everything modeled from my mother. That's just innately in me. Like I had two different examples in my house. I had my father who was, I hate to speak on his name like that because he's deceased, but rest in peace, Dad. I still love him. He was my father. But he didn't do nothing. He didn't do nothing but drink. And he let that take over his life, and he didn't work and he didn't hold down a job. And I saw what that did to his life. My father was in probably every prison in the Maryland, DC, Virginia region. I remember visiting him, and most of my life I saw him behind a glass, taking him socks and cigarettes and in jail. All right. So I had that example. Then I had the example of my mother. And no, even though we didn't have a lot of stuff, she was able to keep the lights on. She was able to do what she could do. And her life was just very different than my father's life. So I definitely didn't want my father's life. So I leaned more towards my mother's life and the things that got her there: the hard work, the integrity, the discipline, the showing up, the work ethic, all those great things. So when I went directly from high school into corporate America, and by the way, I went to a vocational technical high school in Baltimore called Mervo. So while I was in Mervo, I actually took business as my trade. My sister, I have a twin sister. We're 2 minutes apart. We went to the same high school. She took nursing. I took business. And I excelled at business and she excelled at nursing. So when she came out at 17 out of high school, she passed the bar and was already a licensed practical nurse. So we were already on a path to like being about to change our lives, and we didn't even really know it. We just knew we had to do something different. And I was on a path for business, and I excelled at it. I used to win all the little competitions and typing competitions and all that stuff in school. So while I was still in school in my two last final years of high school, I actually went to school half day and I went to work half a day. So I was on work study. Well, I will never forget, in my junior year, I got an offer from a place called USF&G, which was in the downtown Baltimore in the Inner Harbor. And they offered me $6.90 an hour. And I cried like a baby, because for a girl like me on food stamps, coming from the environment, for somebody to say we're going to pay me $6.90 an hour was a huge deal for me to work in an office setting. And I would go to this office setting, and it was so pristine, and it was this big, tall office building. And so I was just becoming more and more exposed to the life that other people lived. And I'm watching them come in with their little suitcases and their cute suits. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to have this one day. I don't know how, but I'm going to have this one day. So then my senior year, same thing. I was on work study. So as soon as I got out of high school, again, I didn't go to college. I went straight into the workforce, and I had a little bit of experience to be able to get a job. But even once I went into that job, I remember, I'll never forget, my very first job, I was actually a receptionist for a CPA and tax firm. And everybody was there. Everyone who was there was Caucasian except for me. I was the only black face in the building, and I'm the receptionist, right? So I was making a, okay salary, but I looked at how they lived. And the whole business was the family. The dad owned the business. His son was one of the CPAs. His daughter was this. His wife was this. And I looked at the cars they drove. I looked at how they used to eat out at nice restaurants. I just looked at the way they lived. And I was just like, oh, I'm only going to be at this desk so long. And I literally started just implementing business skills. And then before and for me, my thing was when I was in the corporate space, I didn't stay anywhere too long because then I believe you get comfortable. So I didn't stay. I stayed there maybe a couple years. Then I started seeking something else. And then I grew from receptionist to like an administrative assistant. So now I went from $20,000 to $24,000 a year, right? Then I went to, and then I went to the next, and then I went to the next, and I just kept growing my skills and taking risks. And I would stay somewhere a couple years, and I would go search for another job. And I would stay somewhere a couple years, and I would search for another job. And then I'll never forget this. I went and applied for a job that I technically didn't feel qualified for, and I really wasn't qualified for. But it was me pushing, right? Like let me just push and see if I can get this, because at the end of the day, an assistant is an assistant and is an assistant. And just because I don't do legal stuff doesn't mean I can't do the job of a legal secretary. So that was the job I was applying for. I go to the job, I have an interview. I naturally have great communication skills, which I don't even know at that time. I don't even realize I got great communication skills. So I go to the interview. There's a African-American woman who is the assistant general counsel of this company, of the law firm in this company. And I go and I'll never forget. And I asked for, like $30,000, right? And I was making maybe 26,000 at the time. And I was like, oh, 30,000. I don't have any law experience, but I have a lot of administrative and executive assistant experience. And this woman saw greatness in me. And not only did she give me the 30,000, she offered me $50,000 as my starting salary with no legal experience. There was something that she saw in me that I didn't even know was there. And I said yes, and that just took my career to the next level. So it was just all these steps of sticking with it, showing up and having the strong work ethic, knowing that there was more. And then once I came into her world, I was really open up to what was, I was like, oh, y'all is living good out here in these streets. Y'all is living good. Yes,
like, we not po no more.
right. And I'm looking at, and then she would invite me to the parties, the Christmas parties that she would have at her home, which was in the nation's capital in DC, in the pristine area of DC. And I would look at this big house, these big houses they were living in. And I just continued. The more I pushed myself to take risks, to go into new uncomfortable spaces, the more I became exposed to, the more I realized I want some of this. I want a little piece of that. I want to be able to live like this. I don't want to have to live scraping the bottom of the barrel. And I never knew the how, but for me, it's always been a thing of being in motion. Consistent motion has consistently allowed me to grow.
Wow. Wow. A lot of times we look at our situations, right? And I always tell my students that I've been in education for 17 years. And I remember sitting, or even to this day, I would sit in these meetings and they would always, can we have all the teachers to stand up that's been in education for 40 years? And people would stand up and they're like, yeah. And I mean, after like a couple of years of teaching, I was like, I'm not going to be doing this. And in 20 years, I'm going to be somebody's superintendent or something. I'm not going to be in this classroom. But my thinking was always like that, right? I was always thinking ahead. And it worked for me. Thank God it worked for me. But it could also be a curse, right? Where I was always, and I learned that through when I went to a counselor when my brother passed away. And she used to tell me, you can't measure your happiness on accomplishments. And I was like, you can't, why can't I? And so, just learning when I was going through that process of like, okay, I would go to meetings and I would see, white women or, other women, they're driving up in a Porsche. I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I'm about to get me one of those. I don't know when, but I'm going to get me one of those. And so I was always thinking like that, right? So my conversations with people were very different. they would be talking about the right now, and I would be like, no, I'm gonna be doing, I don't want to go out because I would rather plan. Like I would rather write my goals down. And I was never a person that just wrote goals down. I was always like, oh, this is gonna happen. This right here is gonna happen. And so because I was always like that, it really helped me to stay course, and also like you accomplish things, kind of move up, move up, move up. Having those communication skills, being able to, be approachable, right? I think a lot as a Black woman, um, you know, we were born into this world with this stigma already on our backs, right? As a strong Black woman. And so it worked for us. And then it also was a curse sometimes, because it was like, okay, today I'm not trying to be strong. Today I want to be a woman. I want to be in my moment. Let me have my moment and then I'll get over it. But then it helped us because we knew what we were capable of doing if we continued to press, right? And so I really love the fact that when you are looking at your journey, you talking about, something that sometimes what other people see in us, we don't see in us. And it's God speaking through them, right? God is saying, you asking for 30, I'm about to give you $50,000. I've gotten jobs where I didn't apply for, but they called me for an interview. And I'm like, yeah, I'm filling out the application on the way to interview, like, I never applied for this job. And so I just, we have to, even when we don't see the big picture. When I used to speak at different churches or women events or whatever, I would tell them, don't expect a harvest when you haven't planted anything, right? And planting doesn't always have to be always consistently, always all the time, but it could be what you sowed into somebody. It could be what how you dealt with certain situations, how you how did you act when God gave you $20,000? Okay, she did good, she ain't blow it. Let me give her $25,000. Let me give her 35,000. Okay, let me give you double, right? So you go in there asking for 30 and you get 60, or you go in there asking for 20 and you get 40. I want you to talk about now, like as you started moving into that space, right? I know that when I started speaking, it was introduced to me through a mentor. And prior to me meeting my mentor, I remember leaving my church and telling them, well, I'm going to be leaving. I'm moving to Houston. I didn't know what I was going to do in Houston. I didn't know anybody in Houston. I didn't know any of these things. And I remember like way back when I first started coaching, I was always winning all these championships. And my dad used to always say, like, you need to go to Toastmasters because, when you get interviews, you're going to have to be able to talk about your program. And I was like, I'm not going to be talking to people. So I don't need Toastmasters. So I didn't do that. And then when I left my church, I told my church, well, I'm going to go to Houston. They said, what are you going to do out there? So I'm just going to coach. And so they said, oh, okay. So I moved out to Houston. Fast forwarding, I got a mentor. My mentor started hearing my story. And she said, you need to write a book and then you're going to start speaking. And I was like, oh, no, I don't have time to write no book. And I do not like talking to people, speaking in front of big crowds. Like nobody wants to hear my story. I didn't have like a traumatic, and I always thought that, right? Like, oh my God, my life needs to be super traumatic for people to be like, her story is amazing. And so it took a lot for me to realize that your story makes you unique, right? Doesn't matter how traumatic it is, doesn't matter, we all have our different journeys. So when you decided to go into the space of speaking, right? How did you know, like, okay, do I want to talk about the things that I've gone through? Do I want to speak on prosperity? Do I want to speak on resiliency? Do I want to speak on, because we all feel like we can speak on numerous things, but what was that one thing that you said, now this right here, this is what I'm going to talk about because, for whatever reason. So what was it for you?
Yeah, so it's been an evolution. I'm a little bit like Brian. I always say speaking found me. I didn't find it, but I believe it found me because I was in motion and I was in a space of being curious enough to explore what else was available. So, kind of fast forward through my corporate experience, I ended up landing a job as a legal secretary. I kept growing. My last stint in corporate America was back in like 2009. And I was making like $75,000 a year, right? And sometimes like the devil will make you feel like, oh, well, you should be happy with that because you come from the hood and you ain't had no money in the bank and all this stuff, and you like and you're almost sometimes afraid to rock the boat and try something else because you feel like you should be grateful. but I serve a God of abundance, so I should be able to live a life of abundance. That's just my thought. So anyway, so I found myself in 2009. I'm married. I got 3 kids now. And I was just tired of running the corporate rat race. Like, I was so over going to somebody's job, them telling me when I could come and when I could leave. And I had to put in a slip to ask for a day off. And if my kid woke up sick, it's like, now I'm scared. I got, my stomach is all knotted up because I'm scared about calling them out to the job because they're going to have an attitude. Like, I was so over that. And I felt like I took the best parts of Cheryl to the job, but brought the worst parts of Cheryl home to the people I said I loved the most, which is my husband and my kids. Because see, when I came home, they got all the frustration. I'm angry. I'm tired. I'm unfulfilled. They ain't paying me enough money, but they working me like a Hebrew slave. Like, all that came home. I didn't get that to the people on the job. That came home to my husband and my kids. I'm like, this is very backwards to say these are the people that are my priority, but I treat them the worst, and I take the best parts of me, the smiling, happy, how can I help you, to the job that really is the reason why I'm unhappy. So anyway, so in 2009, I was like, well, look, let me get my feet wet as an entrepreneur. And I didn't know what that meant, what that looked like. In hindsight, my mother always had an entrepreneurial spirit, because in addition to working full time, my mother was always selling something. She sold Tupperware. She sold encyclopedias. Y'all remember encyclopedias? My kids don't know what an encyclopedia is now, but she sold Tupperware. She sold Mary Kay. She sold encyclopedias. My mother cooked her face off, and she would sell dinners. So in hindsight, I'm like, my mother really was an entrepreneur. So anyway, so I'm like, okay, let me tap into this entrepreneur thing and figure out if there's a way that I can somehow create a path that's of economic independence that's separate from somebody giving me a paycheck. Because I can't do this no more. Now, I didn't quit my job because I wasn't crazy, and I still had bills. So I still worked my job, but I started this t-shirt business in 2009. And the t-shirt business was called Moms Are the Best. And what I did was, I didn't have a degree. I didn't have a business degree, and none of that. It was just like trial and error. Let's see if we can figure this thing out. Reading books. I used to live in Barnes and Nobles. I don't even think they have no bookstores for real anymore other than Amazon. But I used to go to the bookstore, read books, all that kind of stuff, and just learn as much as I can. So I launched the business, and on weekends I would go and I would set up a table, like a vendor table, like at events, conferences, workshops, flea markets. I didn't care. Anywhere there was people, I would set up a table, and I would try to sell t-shirts. And sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. And sometimes I would be discouraged because I didn't sell nothing, but I had been there all day. And I had to pack all that stuff back up, take it back home. And my husband would be like, so what you sell? Nothing. I ain't sell nothing. Like, it was a hot mess. It was a hot mess. But I just kept doing it. There is so much power in what I call obstinate persistence. There's so much power in being stubbornly persistent that I'm going to do this until I figure it out. I don't have to have the full blueprint. I don't know the how, but I'm going to keep showing up, because my belief is there's no way that you can disrupt what you normally do and never, ever experience something different on the other side of what you're already been experiencing. So I figure if I show up enough times, something going to happen. Sure enough, 18 months later, I get a phone call unexpectedly from somebody at Morgan State University. Guess what? They heard about the t-shirt business. And they said, well, look, we do this women's conference every year. We get 200, 300 women who come from all across the country. We would love for you to come and speak and share your story and teach other moms in the Baltimore community how to start their own businesses. Yeah. You know what I did? I burst out laughing. I was like, I think you dialed the wrong number. Like, I'm not a speaker. I was like, you, Dr. Cheryl. I ain't no speaker. I don't belong on nobody's stage. I don't have no big story, dramatic story. I grew up in the hood. A lot of people grew up in the hood. And they were like, no. We were looking for you. You own Moms Are the Best, right? Like, yeah. So I'm like, listening. And then I gave myself permission to say yes. Even though I was scared, even though I felt unqualified, even though I'd never done it before. I just was like, Cheryl, sometimes God drops opportunities in your lap because you've been showing up, because you've been planting seeds, and you got to say yes, because that could be the big thing. Lo and behold, if that wasn't the big thing. So it was September 18th, 2010. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was nervous. My palms were sweating. My heart was racing. I had knots in my stomach. I was like, oh my God, why did I say yes? Why did I say yes? And then I would just breathe. And I was like, Cheryl, just be authentically you. Just you plan, you prepare for this. You put a little PowerPoint together. I was trying to at least act like I knew what I was doing, right? I go up to the front of the room and I'm just like, Just be authentically you. Don't try to be nobody else. I was like, Cheryl, don't try to use no big words. You know, you ain't go to college.
Look.
Don't get up on stage and get caught up and get fancy. Like, just be you. And y'all, as I'm in the midst of pouring, like just telling my story, like where I came from, the same stuff we're talking about now, where I came from and what my big goals were, and the power of facing your fears and having a tenacious spirit and all. I only taught what I knew then. I didn't know how to make money yet, so I didn't teach nobody how to make money. But what I did know how to do was to feel fear, but do it anyway. That's what I used to teach women. Like, even if you're scared, go for it anyway. Take the risk, take the chance. That's what my whole presentation was about. I didn't know what I was doing when I started my business, but I went for it anyway. I did the research. I did the, and I was sharing with them my real life story. And as I look down to the audience, I'm like, oh my God, I see a woman over to the left and she got tears streaming down her face. And I'm like, oh my God, like, she's crying about my story. She's crying about me sharing my story. It was a connection that was being made in that moment in my life that makes me so emotional, that I had never experienced before. I never felt that way. And I look over and I see people taking notes. Girl, like I'm some authority on something. I was like, I ain't no expert. I ain't no authority. And in that moment, what I realized was I want to do this for the rest of my life. Why? Because I want to make people feel like that for the
Yeah.
rest of my life.
Yeah.
I wanted to make people feel hopeful. I wanted to make people feel like they could do it. Wanted to make people feel like, oh my God, nobody can count me out. You know, the sky is the limit. Like, I wanted to make people feel like that for the rest of my life. And it was that day that I made that decision that I was going to be a world-renowned motivational empowerment speaker, whatever you want, however you want to call it. I knew I wanted to speak into people's lives for the rest of my life.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. You know, we, like you said, we never know what, God tells us that he has a purpose and a plan for our life. And, it's hard, right? It's hard to know that, and to believe that, but to move in that is something totally different, and sometimes we know it for other people. We can look at somebody and say, Brian, you're going to be, successful. You're going to be this, you're going to be that. But when it's time to speak that to yourself, we're like, mm, but you kind of, you still have this situation and you still have that situation. Right. And so when I was introduced to speaking, I had to learn first how to forgive myself. It's like you are saying things to yourself that you wouldn't even say at an event, or to your enemy, what you're telling your own self. Right. And so it's amazing how, uh, um, when you can see it from just continuing to press, right, like you said, like it start, if you would have just said, I'm not selling no damn shirts, I'm out, let me throw these rest of these 3 shirts I have away and be done with it, because this ain't working. And that's what's wrong with a lot of people when you think about the entrepreneurship, is they don't be in anything long enough,
Yep.
right, to see
Yep.
it work. It's like, oh, that didn't work. It's
That
like, well,
didn't work.
how many hot dogs did you sell? You only sold one hot dog. Like, maybe you just need to add another ingredient, or maybe you need to set up at a school. Maybe you need to, do hot dogs and sausages. I don't know, but a lot of people, I realize as I started getting, I've always been in the entrepreneurship, uh, space, because my father was that, right? My father did 22, 25 years in the military, but then I saw him fix cars up and flip it. Then I saw him, come on, ride with me. We're going to these apartment complexes and we knocking on doors and getting people's rent. And my dad, he did not speak Spanish, but he made it happen, right? So he would knock on the door. I always tell this story. He would knock on the door, and the people would say, bueno, and he would say rento, duo. And I used to be like, that's not Spanish, and he'd be like, it's all right, they know what I'm talking about, right? But just seeing that they loved him because it's a relationship that he had, and so I started to see how important it was to have a relationship with someone, and then also how it helped his business grow. Like, okay, so if you build a relationship, and then people will hear about, who you are and what you do, and then your business will grow, right? And so I was always growing up thinking like that. So as I got into my adult life, I was like, I could buy this, flip it, And then, and people were like, what are you flipping? What are you talking about? I thought you was a teacher, right? So a lot of times you don't know what God is asking you to do or what God wants you to do. And so it's power in being persistent, is power in being obedient, right? To continue to press. I remember when I was asked to do my first speaking and I was like, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And they're like, well, we want to fly you out to Thailand and you're going to be up there and all these women are going to be looking for you and buying tickets. And I'm like, I can't go up there. But like you, having this conversation and saying, this is not about you. When I go out and like, okay, Cheryl, this is not about you. It's about someone else. And you never know who's in that crowd that needs to hear your story. And we don't talk about our story enough. And that's why we decided to have the Black podcast, because we don't speak enough about our story, right? And the fact that education or going to college wasn't your initial, step or to get into entrepreneurship, which is what we teach everybody. Okay, well, you got to go to college, you got to get this, you got to go that. Your journey can be different. Your journey might be backwards. You may start your business and then go back to college, whatever that is. And so I really appreciate you sharing that story. So once you moved on from selling the t-shirts, what was next? And then Brian, go ahead.
I just kept going with it. That's it. I look, I'm like the Energizer Bunny child. Once I get started, I don't stop. I don't stop. And I started using my gift more and more. I started sharing my story more and more. And honestly, for an entire year after that, I just volunteered to speak anywhere anybody would have me, because I wanted a full year of experience and exposure. That experience and exposure and networking at events allowed me to meet new people. I started introducing myself as an international speaker. I hadn't left Baltimore yet, but I was, projecting what was going to happen. I already knew. Like, Zig Ziglar has a quote. He says, in order to reach a goal, you've got to see the reaching in your own mind before you ever accomplish the goal. So for me, it was about the visualization techniques and knowing where I wanted to be and almost being able to touch it, hold it, smell it, feel it before it actually physically, tangibly manifested. And so that started getting me more and more opportunities. And that was the thing. I was responsible for every opportunity I got. I never took any opportunity for granted. I didn't care if there were 3 people in the room. Oh, baby, I was going to give a speech like it was 3,000 people in the room. So I was very responsible with the opportunities that were granted to me. And I treated it as though it was paying me top dollar or was in front of thousands of people. And so you start to create a reputation for yourself of being a person who executes in excellence. And that also opens doors of opportunity. And before you know it, I'm getting called by the FBI and the, Department of Defense and this person and that group and to come and speak. And it just started growing and growing and growing. And then I, at some point, got to a point where I was like, well, I want to do this full time, because I was still working my full-time job. And that was a whole nother like scary feeling. Like, wait a minute. You're going to walk away from this direct deposit. And my husband was like, wait a minute. I married you and you was a girl with a job and benefits. What happened? What's happening right now? I don't understand. Now you gonna go talk for a living and they gonna pay you for that, huh? I was like, one day they gonna pay me for it. They weren't paying me for it yet. But I just had such belief in, I knew what I wanted. And there's so much power in having clarity about what you want and being able to visualize it before it actually manifests. That will give you the drive and the adrenaline and everything you need to go for it. The hunger, as Les Brown says, you got to be hungry for it, enough to lose stuff for it, enough to, get out of your own way, enough to combat your own toxic thinking about what you're not capable of. And so fast forward, it was, consistently showing up in excellence. And then I started understanding the value of investing in myself. So I started hiring coaches. Once I was at that space where I could hire coaches, afford to hire coaches who also could teach me how to master the skill set of speaking, so that it wasn't just a hobby, but it was going to be a full-time career. And before you knew it, I was starting to actually, and then I had to really tap into something you said, Dr. Cheryl, which was my own belief in me, because I was never going to charge what I was worth if I didn't believe in me, if I didn't believe that I had value, if I didn't believe that I belonged at the front of the room, if I didn't believe that there was something that I could deliver to that audience, even though I didn't have a degree, but I was talking to people with PhDs. At the end of the day, we're all human. And most of us as humans want the same thing. We want to feel loved. We want to feel appreciated. We want to feel valued. And we want to feel like we are a part of something that's bigger than us. So I don't care if I'm talking to NASA or if I'm speaking to an entrepreneurs in a conference. We all, at the end of the day, want very similar things. We want to be better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday. And so I started focusing more on that instead of what I didn't have. I don't have this degree or these letters behind my name. And that got me in front of more, into more opportunities and more doors and greater stages. And that confidence that I was building in myself allowed me to start charging what I was really worth, which became, the turning point for me being broke, busted, and disgusted as a speaker, to a speaker who has now built $1 million enterprise, speaking, coaching. I've traveled to South Africa and spoken into the lives of young girls that look like me. I've been on the soil of India and Jamaica and Paris and, all parts of Europe. And like, it's been an amazing journey. But I always say I'm in my sexy chapter 12 of the journey. But everything we've talked about tonight, honey, that was the chapter 1 through 11. It'd be like, whoa, Lord, I'm glad you made it through that to get to the sexy chapter 12. So some of us want to get to the sexy chapter 12 and we want all the manifestations that we've dreamed about and talked about and journaled about and vision boarded about, but you ain't put nothing in. Your expectation can never be bigger than your execution. What are you executing? How consistently are you executing? Are you sticking with it? Are you creating like ain't no plan B? No, this is the plan. We're gonna do it. We're gonna work this plan until we get what we want. I didn't have a plan B. It was, this is plan A. This is the plan I'm going with, and I'm gonna do whatever I have to do to get to the manifestation of this plan.
All right, so we're gonna have to quickly package this recording and throw it out to the masses so they can hear this and they can go out and kill it in life, because it really doesn't matter what area of life you're in. If you can see it before you see it, that's half of the battle. And then having the discipline to stick to it.
Yep.
But then at the core, having the reason why. Why do you even want to do it? Like, if at the end of the day you don't do it, is it the end of the world for you? Because if it ain't, then you probably should be doing something different. And it's so impactful what you just mentioned along the lines of, they don't want the journey that it took to get there, but they want the result. And that's what so many people see. And as we started out with earlier on social media, you see the result and you want the result, but you don't want the process that it took to get to the result. You don't want to go and speak 20 plus times before you get one red cent. You don't want to get in front of people who have a higher title or are tax brackets above you. You're too scared to get in front of them. You have to, and in the words of I think Eric Worre, you have to have ignorance on fire. Even if you don't know fully what it is that you're bringing to these people, you don't know fully what it is that they need for their specific industry. If you come with enough confidence and enthusiasm, they're going to buy into your message and want you to come back and give them another message and ask, okay, what did she talk about? I don't remember what she said, but I know it made me feel good. So you have to do that regardless of what it is that you're doing in life. And I do a lot of entrepreneurship coaching. And there's so many people that come in and they'll see myself, they'll see my partner, they'll see some of the things that we're doing, some of the accomplishments that we've made. And they've been in the program 6 months. Man, I'm doing everything that y'all said. And where my break at? I've been saying for years, I wanted to live. You've been saying for years. How many years you've been putting in the work? And I have so many people. When I first started speaking 2019, I was all up and down the East Coast, all over the place speaking 2019. And I had this young lady that asked me, she's like, Brian, like, so how much do you charge on your first speaking engagement? How much did you know to charge? What is your preparation? I'm like, girl, for one, 90% of the time when I go and speak, I have bullet points and everything else comes from the heart. Because I'm doing what I love. I'm not going out here to check off some boxes. I'm going out here speaking from my heart, pouring into that next generation or whoever it is that's in front of me. And when it comes to charging, girl, if I can't count on all my fingers and all my toes how many times I spoke for free before I got that first big check. I'm like, you know what? That's the bare minimum I'm taking anymore. But it's the process. It's the process. And when you can go step by step and fall on your face, get all scarred up, all broken up, but you still wake back up, stand back up with that same enthusiasm that you had before you fell down, that's when you know you're going in the right direction. And I would, what time is it? Share on this before we get ready to close out. What is one of those phrases, one of those statements, one of those clauses that you pour into individuals to let them know what it takes to get where you want to get ultimately? So it's easy for us to say what we want, but then life happens. Someone's sick in the family, a relationship starts to have some friction. What is it that you pour into those that you speak in front of that want to bring the excuse as to why they can't do what's necessary? Not, I didn't say as good as you can. I didn't say your best. I said what is necessary to accomplish. What is your message that you pour into individuals on how they can accomplish what's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I mean, we all have two options in life. We make an excuse or we make a way. And it's
Yeah.
really simple. It's really, we don't have to put it into big fancy words. You make an excuse or you make a way. There's somebody somewhere on this planet who has circumstances similar to yours, if not the exact as yours. And while you're creating excuses, they're creating a plan for their next thing and their next move. And you're still sitting in the excuse, holding yourself hostage to where you are versus where you have the opportunity to be. I live by this quote from Tony Robbins. He says, a real decision is measured by the fact that you've taken a new action. And if there is no new action, you have not truly decided. So it's not about what you say. It's not about what you put on the vision board. It's not about what you journaled about. It's what you do. That is what dictates that you have made a decision that you're not going to stay stuck where you are. You're not going to be held hostage to a life that feels like an existence, that you're actually going to invest in becoming the best, the greatest version of you. Why? Because as long as you are living and breathing, there is more for you to do. The thing that is not growing is dying. Are you growing? Are you developing? Are you becoming someone new every single day, little by little? And if that's what you desire, then you've got to be willing to put the work in to become that person. None of us here, none out of all three of us, none of us have gotten where we wanted to just because we thought about it or we prayed about it. Honey, after you get up off them knees, what did you do? After you prayed the prayer, what did you do? Because you think you're waiting on God and God waiting on you. Like, come on, he waiting on you to show up and demonstrate that this is what you really want. Be in motion, be in movement, plant those seeds, show up, fall down, get back up, be resilient. He's waiting to see that, your true manifestation that you wanted. And you think you're waiting on him to drop the blessing in your lap. Not going to happen. So get up and do something today. Do something that you haven't done before. Do something that scares you. Do something that's going to grow you. Do something that terrifies you. And you're like, oh my God. Like if it doesn't scare you, it can't possibly grow you because it just means you're doing something that you already know how to do and you're comfortable doing. And that is not where growth happens. Growth only happens in the phase of, oh my God, what have I signed up for? Like, why did I say yes to this? That's where growth and expansion happens. And then you realize all that's available to you. So just keep doing that. Have that on rinse and repeat for your life and watch where you are. Just in the next 6 months to 12 months, watch where you are. And it'll be completely different than where you are today.
I love it.
Wow. I always know when it's getting real good because Brian gets this look on his face like, Cheryl, you did good, girl. You did good with this one. You did good with this one. Thank you. Well, we thank you for sharing that. Now, let us know, like what products you have, what services you have to offer. If you have any events where we can support you at or anything, this is the time. Please, share that with us.
Yeah, thank you guys again for having me. I do a lot of community give back initiatives. A lot of the events that I host throughout the year, the virtual events, because we're in the pandemic still, are free. So I would encourage you to follow me on social media at Cheryl Empowers. I would encourage you to become a part of my VIP community list at www.cherylempowers.com so that you can get notification of those events. The next one that I'm hosting is actually connected with this book that I did with Les Brown. This launches January 11th through 13th. It's a 3-day virtual conference. It's free. The link for that is possibilitiesunlimitedconference.com. I've just been doing some amazing things with some amazing people, some gurus who are in the industry. I'm launching a project called Hope Renewed, which is also a book project that I will be using that as a community give back because people need the human spirit needs to be renewed. Like if you just look at the news, you got to turn it right back off. You can't even have it on more than 5 minutes. You got to turn it right back off because it seems like people have lost their minds, but really people have become in feelings of helplessness and hopelessness and their spirits feel broken. even kids, there's an increase in depression among kids and suicide because they don't have that social interaction they're used to. Like, this pandemic has hit all of us in a way that, we can't always articulate. So this book is actually a beautiful project of 100 global speakers who all share a positive, inspirational message, so that no matter where you open up in that book, it's going to lift your spirit and stir your soul, so that you feel more hopeful, you feel empowered, you feel reignited to keep pushing just another day. And sometimes that's what we need. We just need to read that one thing that just fills our cup for that moment, because we might be going through. I know last year for me, it was a very difficult year. My twin sister, I mentioned her earlier, lost her baby boy, 20 years old, junior at Morgan State University, on the dean's list, starting wide receiver for Morgan State Bears. Just an amazing kid with such a bright future. Died tragically in a motorcycle accident. And when I tell you, you talk about life just knocking the wind out of you, we are still going through the grieving process of that loss, that profound loss. But just think how many hundreds of thousands of people have lost loved ones due to the pandemic, and have lost jobs due to the pandemic, and lost hope. So my goal going in 2022 is to really give back to the community in a way that says, get back up, keep trying, keep pushing, keep striving, don't give up. As long as you have life and breath in your body, there is hope for better on the other side of the pain that you're currently experiencing. So you'll see that book come out. Our goal is to distribute a minimum of 10,000 copies of that book. So I love to send some your way to distribute to some of the young people that you're serving. It's a give back. The books will not be sold. My company will solely distribute the book, and we will not charge a dime for it, because to whom much is given, much is required. So again, just stay connected with me, Cheryl Empowers, and go to my website, CherylEmpowers.com, so that you can just learn about all these initiatives, again, which many of them are no cost.
Wow.
Speaking my language. I love it.
Absolutely. You are so amazing. And it is such a blessing and honor to have you as a guest, but now as family. We truly believe that you haven't even touched the surface of what God is going to do for you and what's going to happen in your life. And we're just happy to be connected to you. Thank you again for sharing your story, your real story. We
Yeah.
talked about keeping it 100. And so thank you for allowing us into your world. I think one of the hardest things sometimes, even for myself, when I was writing my book, was uh, having to revisit those hurtful places, where you're like, ooh, I'm still hurting from that, right? And so I think it helps us, right? It helps us to grow. It helps us to stay in alignment and know that, there's other people that need to hear our story. So please, Dr. Cheryl, keep inspiring, keep empowering, keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing it well. And so it is such a blessing and honor to see a woman as beautiful as you, inside and out. So thank you for being a guest on the Black Podcast. And this is just the beginning of the relationships and connections that will be built from this. So thank you again.
Thank you so
Yes,
much.
indeed.
Thank you guys so much.
Our
We're going
pleasure.
to put you in the backstage and they will close you out.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome.
Well, another great show.
They just keep coming
Amazing.
and coming.
Keep coming and coming. It's just so amazing to hear. We talk about being a product of your environment, and her being able to see what her environment looked like, but knew that she wanted better. She started to imagine herself being something that she's never seen. And so I think that we have to, if you don't have the willpower or the strength to do it yourself, surround yourself around people that can speak into your life, that you may not be able to see it. Like she was saying, she thought she was worth $30,000 at that one job, but they offer her 50. So sometimes other people in your life are there to speak life to you, or your job or your opportunity may be to speak life to them. And so I just think it's so important that if you don't have, and I think you said that quote earlier about ignorance. What did you say about
Ignorance on fire.
Right. So if it's something that you don't know, ask, right? If you don't know how to be make millions of dollars being a speaker, then go find someone who's making millions of dollars as a speaker and ask. All they can tell you is no, right? And so we have to start putting our fear and our pride aside and saying, if you want better for yourself and if you can't see it for yourself, put yourself in front of somebody else or get in front of someone else that you can see who's doing it. And hey, you never know who's willing to pour into you. As you mentioned, they're going to have free books that can be given out. So when people are giving to you, sowing to you, please make sure you're taking advantage of that. And just like sharing this video, it's important. This is something that you can go play over and over and over and remind yourself of who you are and what you can accomplish. So please make sure that you are sharing this video of today's show.
Yeah. Ultimately, guys, y'all just need to be taking notes, like every single show, keeping record. And you know what? Today I'm gonna read, or I'm gonna read over my notes from episode with Dr. Wood. Today I'm gonna read over, guys, because this information, literally, if we were to put this information into a book, it would be worth thousands of dollars, thousands upon thousands of dollars, just the information that's been given out. And it's one thing to get information, but it's another thing to apply that information, actually see the benefits of it coming into fruition in your life. So, off that note, guys, this is our last episode of the year.
I was laughing because my mom sent the message. She goes, "Oh, really? Red lipstick?" I'm like, "Did you listen to the rest of the show, or are you worried about my lipstick?" I don't ever do color. I always do nude. But yes, this is the last show of 2021, and let me tell you, 2022, bringing it, continuing to bring it. So I'm just excited about. I guess it's coming up next week. But let me tell you, when you think it don't get any better, it's just these people. I mean, the fact that how they operate in their own space makes them so unique, and I love it. Absolutely
Yeah.
love it.
Fortunately, we were able to acquire a pretty stellar talent, um, whatever you want to call her. She goes out and gets some nice people. I forget where we found her, but
She hasn't been found.
well, guys, that's it for today. Make sure you go check out our website. We are hsba.com. Learn about everything we've got going on, from the Black Podcast all the way to our mentoring and leadership development programs, workshops, presentations, etc. And be sure to also go over to Instagram and follow us at We Are HSBA, period between each word. And guys, engage. You never know. Just the pure fact of you making a certain comment is going to trigger something in someone to take a certain action that's going to help them get to where it is that they truly desire in life. And off that note, that's a wrap for today. Y'all stay well. Y'all have a wonderful new year. And we'll see you on the other side.